Thanks, and welcome to the talk. The alternate title for this talk would be actually the lean approach to ITSM, because people do lean stuff nowadays. And the idea of the talk is to give an idea how to dive into this subject from just having monitoring into actually engage with your customers via ticketing. And since we're at a monitoring conference, I want to start off with a couple quotes. Monitoring strategy should start from the business's KPIs. That actually flew by Twitter. It's from Devdas Bhagat, and to ops, while I really agree with him, for ops people it's a bit difficult to grasp. So I would actually put it as I heard at Monitorama 9 years ago. Monitoring needs to enable your team to engage, which is actually a nice way of putting it. So let me introduce myself. I'm Felix, and I come from the times where you actually would run an open finger daemon on the network to the outside to actually retrieve information and publish information about yourself. So I've been doing open source for quite some time. And I just very recently joined Gridscale, a next generation infrastructure as a service and platform as a service vendor as the product owner. And probably more people know me from the company I've ran for 15 years, Bytemine. Bytemine is an Linux, Unix, open source consultancy agency up in North Germany. I founded Bytemine in 2003 and was the CEO until the end of last year. And lots of what I'm going to talk about here today is actually things we gathered at Bytemine, learnings from that, and how we actually came to ITSM at Bytemine. And aside from that, if I'm not working there, I'm a member of the board of the Open Source Business Alliance, which is a non-profit organization in Germany that promotes open source on a political level. Good example is if you have a call for bids, we make sure that actually open source solutions are looked at the same way as proprietary solutions. So that to myself. And of course, I'm a long-term BSD user. That's kind of how I started with open source stuff, so run BSD. ITSM, a fairly nice term, and the definition for that is IT service management refers to the entirety of activities directed by policies, organized and structured in processes and supporting procedures that are performed by an organization to design, plan, deliver, operate, and control information technology services offered to customers. That's actually, I looked it up and put it there and I thought, that's again fairly hard to grasp if you try to get the point across. So I would like to put it in my own terms. IT service management enables us to deliver a superior customer experience when things go wrong. And I'm sure everyone in the audience will agree, things will go wrong. And then looking at ITSM, there are certain building blocks, and one is definitely the process that outlines certain things. Another one is monitoring. The third one is service desking, often referred to as ticketing. And last but not least, it's CMDB. And while process is a nice term, it's again hard to describe, so I would like to put it as standard operating procedures, which is a term that's for ops people much easier to understand and much easier to get across. CMDB, again, I would like to put it as asset management. And coming to the first part of the building blocks, the process or SOP, a process needs to enable people in your organization to actually engage autonomously. If they have some issue, they need to actually know how to deal with it themselves without actually saying. So if you have an old-timer in your organization for many years, they usually know stuff implicitly, how to deal with an outage, and that's what often is referred to as muscle memory. And that's a very implicit thing because it's built up over time. And something that is very implicitly is kind of hard for newcomers. And the process actually needs to be a guidance and not a handcuff. A colleague of mine said a while ago, show me a process and I'm going to show you a way around it. And by that, it's actually, he showed me in that way that it's very very good if you have a process that actually feels like a guidance and actually makes things easier and not hurdles you in any way. So the process needs to be taken from being very implicitly to being explicitly. And by doing so, another thing needs to be observed or taken care of. You need to have reasons, not rules. And when we first started having more customers at ByteMine, a colleague of mine, one of our first employees, approached me and said, "Hey, Felix, I read on the internet," that was in, I think, 2008, 2009, "Hey, I've read, hey, there are some organizations that have established so-called standard operating procedures. And what they do is actually write down how to handle a certain incident so that people know in the moment the incident happens how to react instead of then starting to think about it. And by actually writing down standard operating procedures, one establishes building blocks for establishing a process. And you actually help increase the quality by establishing certain standards, how to handle incidents. So a good example for such an SOP is actually the first SOP he wrote was how to write an SOP, and the second one he wrote was how to deal with the phone outage at our office, because we started very early with voice over IP. We would sometimes experience phone outages, so we need to have a way to handle that. So he sat down, and basically what he just did, he opened up a wiki page in the Redmine and started writing, hey, first is verify the outage, actually make sure our phone is the problem. Second, publish a predefined item for this case on our status page. Third, inform the rest of the company. Fourth, open a ticket with the phone company. And last but not least, if the item is resolved, depublish the status item. And by actually doing that, he made sure that if he's not around, because he knew how to deal with it, but if he's not around, some other guys would know what to do and would just follow the procedure. While the phone outage is a very simple example, a much better or much harder example is, for example, DRBD. If you have a cluster of DRBD nodes and you are called out in the middle of the night because of the alerting engine calls you and you are on duty, it's much easier if you actually run down the standard operating procedures for dealing with that outage, instead of then sitting there and thinking, what am I have to do now? Who do I have to call? Where do I have to open a ticket? So that makes it just much easier. And the bonus is you lower the barrier for newcomers to your organizations. So that's the process part. And coming to that, next step is the monitoring. And we had a monitoring conference, and I'm sure everybody does monitoring. And monitoring is, of course, not boring, but I'm obviously preaching to the choir with certain stuff. But I want to repeat certain things on monitoring, because while we all know them, it's kind of good to actually have them present. So I was sitting in a talk from Martin Alfke from Example 42 the other day, and he said, so who is doing monitoring? And everybody raised their hands, and he said, well, I'm not doing monitoring anymore, I'm doing metrics. Still, we have something that generates events, and based on that, possibly alerts someone. I think, for example. So a monitoring should trigger a genuine action, and it should disrupt your routine, and by that it assists in achieving higher quality. And that's actually something you cannot repeat often enough, because I've known every time I came into a company that has some sort of monitoring, I always see these certain red alerts that everybody ignores. And it's like, yeah, that's been like that for ages. Yeah, we know, it doesn't matter. And so that's something I actually want to get across. It's really important that monitoring should always trigger a genuine action and disrupt the routine. So for the monitoring part, everybody has monitoring, so that's good. Service desking. Service desking, ticketing. RequestTracker is one of the famous examples, actually one of the old-timers, and also available from NETWAYS in the software as a service offering. It's actually what I started with many years ago, because I started in the ISP businesses, and RequestTracker was what everybody used there. Then there's, of course, OTRS, also a famous candidate for having some sort of ticketing. And new to the game, new is Zammad. Zammad is actually a ticketing that is built by one of the founders of OTRS. So it's not a fork, it's a brand new approach to ticketing. And Martin, when he started Zammad, actually wanted to make sure that he approaches ticketing to the way it's being done now, basically by people not only using email to submit tickets, but also various other channels like chat, Telegram, social media, whatever. And also because lately I'm not quite sure how OTRS still fits into the open source game, I just zap him from the slides. So it's right now RequestTracker, Zammad, probably, for example, Jira Service Desk or whatever. So the service desk is the paper trail for all customer interaction. And it makes sure that you have a good handover in between teams, or in between people. And you handle customer expectations with the ticketing, because everybody can still follow the whole trail. And it raises the overall quality in customer interactions. Actually, the whole company history of ByteMine lives in our RequestTracker there. I actually set it up in 2003, and it was used ever since. So if you have some customer, you can look up the whole history with that inside the RequestTracker. Very good if you actually want to find out why some decision was made 10 years ago. And the fourth building block, the asset management, is, in my opinion, the toughest one of all of them. And I'm actually very happy that I only have a 30-minute slot for the talk, because if I would have a 60-minute talk, I would actually have to dive into this subject very deeply. So I can just slid it along a bit. Various solutions all feel very bulky, I think. And there's asset management built into RequestTracker. I never really got to use it. At ByteMine, we actually developed something that's called IDB, which is an infrastructure database that's basically built around a set of agents that collect infos from various REST APIs. It's all open source. You can find it on GitHub there in its own project. So if you don't have anything where you actually track assets and some sort of changes, look at that. So we have the process with SOPs, we have monitoring, and we have the service desk. So how does that all fit together? And actually that's the next slide is I welcome you to the eye doctor exam slide. I hope you all have good eyes, and if you can't read it, you should see the doctor probably. No, sorry. Basically what I'm just trying to show is that monitoring is being triggered, alert is sent out to the alerting engine, and support case is created. And what we used to have is basically monitoring alert is sent out to the people on call. Somebody will probably take care of, but nobody's really sure, is it being taken care of or not? So, and by that actually, now people go to the ticketing, see there's a ticket, grabs the ticket, and works through the chain. So connecting things. That's actually how I started loving the glue code. At ByteMine, we developed a JSON RT API, which is a Ruby-based wrapper around the command line interface to RequestTracker. And JSON RT API exposes a JSON HTTP API. And as such, you can communicate from the outside via REST request with RequestTracker. But back then, RequestTracker did not have its own API. So we had to actually use that way. And we hooked it into Isinga 1 back then. Actually, it was, even before that, it was a Nagios. And via commands, very easy to do. And there's some blog posts, and the code is there. It's basically on the slides for legacy reasons, because nowadays, with Isinga 2, we can go a different way. And also because RequestTracker now has a REST API as well, we can use Isinga 2RT, which is Golang based. So you have a single static binary that you can compile. It wraps the Isinga 2 event API. There's also a package released for that under ByteMine/go Isinga 2. And this submits events to the RT REST API. If somebody looks at the RT REST API that is built into RT by default, you will see that it is some sort of REST, but not really, because it returns very bulky texts to you and nothing like a nice JSON. It works very well, but can be improved. So there comes something else into the game, what I call rotoshoot. And basically, I had to come up with a logo because If you don't have a logo, it didn't happen. So RotoShoot is, again, Golang based, and it's Isinga 2RT revisited. And I think a year or 2 years ago, there was actually a new REST API published for RequestTracker. That's actually an add-on that you can install alongside with it, and that exposes a very nice REST API. And Isinga 2RT uses the old one. RotoShoot is actually reworked to work with the new API, and also has a nicer addition for further ticketing, and it's available there. And basically what happens if you use something like Isinga 2RT or RotoShoot is you start up, you subscribe to the event loop for Isinga 2, you possibly get an event trigger from the monitoring API, you look up in your own local cache database, do I know that event? Do I don't know it? Is it a relevant event? Yes. And then you either create a ticket, or if it's a known event, you just update the ticket with some new metadata, or you delete the ticket if it has been resolved. Of course, we only delete the ticket if the ticket itself has not changed its status, because what happens is ticket is created, I see the alert, I want to work on the issue and actually go resolve it. And the first thing I do, because that's outlined in my process, is I take the ticket. By that, I communicate to all my colleagues, hey, I'm taking care of this. And RotoShoot will actually see that it's been taken and will not further deal with the ticket. And loops back again, subscribes to the event loop. And for the Isinga people, we all know the typical states. So RotoShoot has a local file where it actually can be defined how to deal with each of them and whether to update or delete a ticket in certain cases. And what I just described basically looks like that. RotoShoot monitoring event stream goes to the ticket API, and from there, some guy handles it. So what's next for RotoShoot is actually finish support for Zammad. That's something I've been working on lately. I want to fully support Zammad because that's a very nice way of doing ticketing, and also support other monitoring solutions such as Prometheus or possibly Sensu, and then look at adding support for arbitrary outbound configurable webhooks. And there are some further resources. There's actually, from the Isinga people, a nice collection of Isinga 2 API examples where they collect all sorts of libraries that somehow hook into Isinga 2. If you want to play around with RequestTracker and actually try things out, there's a nice Docker image available. And also there's for Zammad a Docker image as well. So that leaves 1.5 minutes before we start with questions, but I can say already thanks for listening. Are there any questions? Seriously, no questions? There's a question there. Yeah.
I think we might have talked about this on Twitter at some point, but we wrote a similar tool to your thing, a notification script for RT. And one of the things I found really helpful was making sure that the ticket was commented back in the acknowledgement, in the comment field in the ticketing in Isinga.
Yeah.
That way people can see which ticket is tracking which outage when they look at the dashboards and all those kind of things. Does RotoShoot have that feature as well?
No, but it's a very good idea actually, because you can actually do it very nicely via the API. That's a very good point. Yes, no. I will add it to the list of things I should add. Okay. Very good. Yeah,
that wasn't really a question then, I'm sorry about that.
It's awesome. Very good, very good. So everybody has a well-established ITSM process, and everybody has hooked their monitoring into their ticketing, so this was a whole no-brainer.
I've got a question for everyone else though.
Yeah.
Does anyone use ServiceNow for ticketing? Did you make it work with your monitoring system? How's the bill?
Honestly, we're using NETWAYS as our very base, and we're talking to ServiceNow. The API integration hasn't been a problem. Our real issue is the CMDB backend that ServiceNow relies on, and we're having to basically import everything out of our 15-year-old Nagios system into the CMDB so that every time we create a ServiceNow incident, it has all of that information.
All the right CIs.
Some of which we don't bother retaining because we're monitoring. Why do we care where your host is located so long as it's doing its job?
Yeah, cool. Sorry. Just curious about that.
Oh, that's what we're here for. And we still have 10 minutes, so we might as well. Anything else? Okay. Well, thanks. Oh, there's one.
There's a question. We found a question.
Are there any alerts where you don't recommend opening a ticket automatic?
Well, for the stuff that we did at ByteMine, we actually made sure that only alerts are triggered for stuff where we want to react to, because otherwise it wouldn't be an alert. That's because basically if I don't need to react to an alert, why should I create an alert in the first place? For informational purposes?
Yeah, you know, there are different types of ticketing. There are request for information or request for change and all these things. Maybe you don't create only incident ticket, some other ticket types.
Well, what we actually have is that can be configured both in Isinger2RT or RotoShoot, is that you actually submit the tickets to certain queues or all that, or certain recipients or that. So, there's a differentiation on the ticketing side, of course, where it lands. And for example, for certain customers, we would actually route those tickets into a customer queue, and then the customer queue on the ticketing side has configured whom to notify via the ticketing, because that's again up to the ticketing on where to send. So certain customers where we would have an SLA would actually, once the Isinger2RT sent the event to the ticketing, a ticket was created, and the customer got an email from the ticketing, hey, we recorded something that now ByteMine needs to react to, because that was part of the SLA agreement. And it's actually very nice, because you know when the time starts ticking. And you can easily define that in the support contracts. Because also part of the support contracts is then that, because usually if you have an SLA, you have something like, from the moment the customer reported an incident, time ticks. And you can actually increase the value you offer to the customer if you actually put in there, well, the notification doesn't need to come from the customer itself, but it can also be generated from the ticketing, because it's a higher value than for the customer. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Thank you.
Is there a need for merging tickets? Because if you generate the tickets automatically from alarms, you probably have multiple alarms and multiple tickets which fits together or needs to be...
No, actually Isinger2RT and RotoShoot, but they correlate. So if the disk is filling up and I get an alert for the via the event API and notification for the same alert every 15 minutes or whatever, it detects that it's still the same and doesn't recreate a ticket. However, if the status information changes, it updates the ticket. So what happens, for example, is if you have a warning disk is becoming critical, it opens the ticket. Then the disk switches to critical because it's being filled even more. Isinger2RT updates the same ticket with the information now it is critical. So that it does. So there's no merging needed, because you only work on one ticket the whole time for this one alert, basically. Because you have unique identifiers for the alerts. So you can actually identify, is it still the same issue that's popping up, or is it different? You don't look convinced.
I'm convinced it's depending on the view. If you have alarm about the disk which is getting full, then it's probably the system admin which is interested in this information, and he has to take action.
The customer too, because maybe I'm not reacting to it, so I'm not valuing the SLA.
But
Yeah.
the customer probably is only interested in its services, in the business case, you know, and
Yeah.
then you have multiple alarms, maybe the disk, you have different
Ah.
things, and then you have probably the same ticket to...
Now I comprehend the question. So you're asking, you have like, basically, you have 5 alerts. They all are for different parts of the problem, but for the customer, it is one problem because the website is not reachable. Yes, well, right now there's no merging done because basically, if you that's monitoring philosophy, I guess. But in that case, the ops people should get an alert for all the technical issues, and there should probably be for the customer side a separate check that actually checks the business logic, and that's the thing the customer should get. For example, the customer is interested, is the website running or not? Well, while the ops people might still need to know that, they actually need to know, oh, the database crashed behind it. And so that's basically more or less something you should probably configure in the monitoring side, who is being alerted. And the ticket is the overall thing that the customer sees and that you actually take as the ops person to say, I'm working on the overall problem. That's okay.
Thank you.
So we have 4 more minutes. Anything? I was really actually looking into not doing overtime because I guess a lot of people want to go to the Singer 2 status update. So, well, then I would like people to give a hand to the OSMC Orga people because they're doing really a great job and it's an awesome conference. And if you want to reach me, you can write me an email, write via Twitter, and...
Well, thank you very much. We have a little present for you still.
Yippee!
Here you go.
Thanks.
Well, thank you all for listening.